He said it the way someone mentions the weather. Casual, almost bored. We were sitting at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, in the house I had lived in for 31 years, and my son looked at me across the rim of his coffee mug and said that he needed me to refinance the house. Not ask, not request, not even suggest. He needed me to. I remember the exact moment, because the morning light was coming through the window above the sink, the one that faces the backyard, the one my husband Gerald installed himself the summer before our younger son was born. Gerald always said that window was his best work. Not the deck, not the bookshelves in the den, but that window. I used to tease him about it, and that morning, while my son Daniel was telling me what I needed to do with my own home, I was looking at that window and thinking about Gerald, and thinking about how much I wished he were still sitting in the chair across from me, instead of the man who was. Daniel had moved back in 14 months earlier. He was 42 years old. His business, something to do with importing equipment, I never fully understood. It had collapsed during a slow stretch, and he came to me with a duffel bag and a story about a temporary setback. I said yes because he was my son, and because the house had 4 bedrooms, and because I am his mother, and that is what mothers do. He said 3 months, maybe 4. I did not write that down anywhere. I should have. His wife Sandra came 2 weeks after he did. That part was not part of the original conversation. She arrived with boxes. Actual moving boxes, the kind with printed labels on the side. I stood at the front door and watched the 2 of them carry them up my front steps, and I did not say what I was thinking. I said welcome. I put extra towels in the upstairs bathroom. I made a roast that Sunday. I want to be honest about Sandra, because it would be easy to make her into a simple villain, and she was not simple. She was ambitious. She was organized. She had opinions about everything, and she did not hold them back. Within the first month, she had rearranged the pantry, replaced my dish rack with one she bought herself without asking, and suggested, gently at first, and then less gently, that the living room furniture was outdated. I let the pantry go. I let the dish rack go. When she mentioned the furniture a 3rd time, I told her, still politely, that the furniture was staying. She did not bring it up again, but something shifted after that, a small coldness. Nothing dramatic, just the particular chill of a person who is not used to being told no. Daniel noticed, I think. Or maybe he didn't. That is the part I still turn over sometimes. Whether he knew what was happening in his own house, my house, or whether he had simply stopped paying attention to everything that wasn't his own stress and his own plans. The refinancing conversation happened on a Tuesday in October. The leaves outside were at their peak, that week in southern Ontario, when the maples go almost unbearably red, and I remember thinking the yard had never looked so beautiful, and then I remember Daniel putting down his mug and clearing his throat and saying that he and Sandra had been looking at options. I asked what kind of options. He said that the house had significant equity. He said he'd spoken to someone at the bank. He said that if I refinanced and pulled out $340,000, it would clear their remaining business debt and give them enough to start fresh. He said it the way someone lays out a practical solution to a shared problem. Reasonable. Measured. Like we were partners reviewing a spreadsheet. I looked at him for a long moment. I asked him to say it again. He did. Same words, same tone. I asked him where he thought I would go if I remortgaged this house and handed over $340,000 that I do not have liquid, because equity is not cash, Daniel. It is the walls around me and the roof above me and the 31 years I spent building a life in this place. He said I was being emotional. I did not raise my voice. I have never been a woman who raises her voice when it counts. I told him I needed to think. He nodded like that was acceptable, like I had agreed to consider it, and he picked up his mug and walked back upstairs. I sat at the table for a long time after that. The window light moved across the floor the way it always does in the morning. I thought about Gerald. I thought about the deed to this house that has only ever had 2 names on it, and now has only mine. I did not say anything to Daniel that week, or the next. I want you to understand what that silence cost me. I am not a passive woman. I raised 2 sons, mostly alone after Gerald's first heart attack left him limited, and I did it without complaint and with a great deal of love and also with clear expectations. You clean up after yourself. You do not take what isn't yours. You say thank you. These were not complicated rules. My younger son Thomas lives in Halifax now with his husband and their 2 daughters, and he calls me every Sunday without fail, and he has never once asked me for anything I wasn't offering freely. I do not say this to compare my sons. I say it only because I need you to know that I did not fail at the fundamental thing. I taught them right from wrong. What happened with Daniel is not a story about my parenting. It is a story about a man who married a woman who made him believe that the world owed him something, and who eventually stopped being able to tell the difference between what was his and what was mine. The second conversation happened on a Friday evening. Sandra was home this time. She sat at the kitchen table beside Daniel in a way that told me this had been choreographed. She had a folder, an actual folder with printed pages inside. She slid it across the table to me like we were in a meeting. The pages were from a mortgage broker. They had highlighted the equity figure in yellow, $340,000. There was also a printed sheet showing projected monthly payments, which they had helpfully calculated as a percentage of my pension. I looked at the folder. I looked at Sandra. I looked at my son. I asked Sandra what she imagined I would do when my pension was being eaten by mortgage payments on a house I had already paid off. She said that was a worst-case scenario. She said the business would be back on its feet within 18 months. She said this with tremendous confidence. I noticed she did not say our business. She said the business, which told me something. Daniel leaned forward then. He put his hand flat on the table, near the folder but not on it. And he said that if I wasn't willing to help them, they would have to look at other options. He said it carefully, that phrase. Other options. And I asked him, just as carefully, what he meant by that. He said that the house was too large for one person. He said a lot of things were pointing toward a situation where it might make more sense for me to be somewhere smaller. He said there were very nice places, independent living communities, where I could have my own space, but also support. He said this like he was doing me a favor, like he had thought of something I hadn't. I was 67 years old, in good health, in full possession of my faculties, and my son had just suggested that I move to a retirement community so that he and his wife could remain in my house and refinance it to pay off their debt. I closed the folder. I slid it back across the table. I said good night. I went upstairs to my room and I closed the door and I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a while. Then I picked up my phone and I called my lawyer. Her name is Patricia, and she has been my lawyer since Gerald, and I needed someone to handle the purchase of this house back when we were 36 years old and terrified and so happy we could hardly stand it. Patricia is 71 now and still sharp as anything, and she picked up on the second ring even though it was past 9 on a Friday, because she is that kind of person. I told her what had happened. Not all of it, just the shape of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Margaret, come in Monday morning. We have things to talk about." I did not sleep much that weekend. I did not change anything in my behavior. I made breakfast on Saturday. I folded laundry. I watched the hockey game on Saturday night the way I always do. Daniel and Sandra went out for dinner and came back, and I heard them in the kitchen making tea, and I went to bed at my usual time. Nobody would have been able to tell that anything was different. That is the thing about being a 67-year-old woman who has spent a lifetime keeping her composure. You become very good at looking like nothing has changed, even when everything has. On Monday, I drove myself to Patricia's office on King Street, and I sat across from her desk, and she laid out everything I needed to know. I want to tell you this part clearly because I have heard from so many women who did not know they had options. This house was never going to be refinanced without my signature. That much I already knew. What Patricia explained to me is that I had the ability right then, before anything else changed, to transfer this property into a family trust. The trust could name my 2 sons as beneficiaries, but the trustee, the person with the legal authority to make decisions about the property, would be me, and, in the event of my death or incapacity, Thomas, note Daniel. Thomas, who lives in Halifax and calls every Sunday and has never once asked me for anything. Patricia also told me that I could, in the meantime, ask Daniel and Sandra to sign a formal acknowledgement that they were residing in my home as guests, not as tenants, which would simplify things considerably if it ever came to that. I signed the trust documents that same afternoon. The transfer was registered with the Land Registry Office in Halton Region within the week. Patricia handled all of it. I paid her fee from the money I had set aside for exactly these kinds of necessities, the small private account Gerald and I always called the emergency drawer, money that was not attached to any joint account or visible to anyone looking at my regular finances. I said nothing at home. I went about my days. I smiled at breakfast. I asked Sandra about her sister's new baby. I watched the snow start to come down on the backyard maples, and I thought about Gerald and about the window and about the fact that this house was now, legally and formally, beyond anyone's reach but mine. Daniel raised the subject again in November. This time, there was no folder. He stood in the hallway outside the kitchen and he said that he really needed an answer. His voice had a different quality now, something harder underneath the reasonable surface. He said that they had delayed speaking to the broker because they were waiting for me, and they couldn't wait much longer. I asked him what would happen if my answer was no. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said that in that case, they would need to look seriously at whether the current living situation was workable. I said I would like him to be more specific. He said that if I wasn't going to be a part of solving this problem, then maybe it was time for all of us to reconsider the arrangement. I asked him if he was telling me to leave my own home. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He said that he was saying the situation wasn't sustainable. I nodded. I told him I understood. I told him I would think about what he had said. 3 days later, on a Thursday, I got into my car in the morning and drove to Thomas's house in Halifax. I did not leave a note. I took my important documents, my medications, my photographs, Gerald's watch, the quilt my mother made, and 3 bags of clothing. Everything else I left exactly as it was. The kitchen was clean. The beds were made. There was food in the refrigerator. I turned down the heat 2 degrees the way you do when you'll be away for a little while. I called Daniel from the road, somewhere past Kingston, and told him I had gone to visit Thomas and that I wasn't sure when I'd be back. He asked what I meant. I said I meant I had gone to visit my son, which was something I was free to do, in the same way that I was free to do many things, because I was a grown woman and this was still my life. He started to say something else, and I told him to have a good evening, and I ended the call. I drove 10 hours to Halifax. Thomas met me at the door before I even knocked. I don't know how he always knows. He made tea. He didn't ask me to explain everything at once. He just sat with me at his kitchen table while his daughters slept upstairs, and outside the window, the Atlantic wind was doing what it does in November, which is remind you that the world is very large and very old, and your problems, however real, are not the largest thing in it. I stayed in Halifax for 6 weeks. During that time, Patricia sent a registered letter to my home address, addressed to Daniel notifying him that the property had been transferred into a family trust, that he and Sandra were residing there as guests at the discretion of the trustee, and that should they wish to formalize their tenancy, they were welcome to contact her office to discuss a lease arrangement at market rate for the Halton region, which she helpfully included. I was not there when the letter arrived. I will never know exactly what that moment looked like. I have imagined it many times. Sandra opening it first, probably. Her reading it twice. Calling Daniel in. The silence. What I know is that Daniel called me 40 minutes after the letter would have been delivered, based on Canada Post's tracking notification, which Patricia had set up to forward to my phone. He called 4 times in a row. I let each one go to voicemail. His first message was confused. His second was angry. His third was the one where his voice broke a little, and he said he didn't understand why I had done this, that he hadn't meant things to go this far, that he just needed help. I listened to that one twice. I called him back the next morning. I was sitting at Thomas's kitchen table with the second cup of tea and the winter light coming in off the water, and I was calm in a way I had not been in over a year. I told Daniel that I loved him. That has never changed, and it will not change. I told him that I had not left in anger. I told him that what he and Sandra had asked me to do was not something I was willing to do, not because I didn't want to help him, but because a mother's home is not a financial instrument, and I had spent 31 years building mine and I intended to keep it. I told him that when he was ready to have a different kind of conversation, not about money, not about what I owed him, but about what kind of relationship we wanted to have going forward, I was willing to have that conversation. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, where are we supposed to go?" I said that was a question I thought he and Sandra needed to answer together, the way 2 adults who are married generally do. I said Thomas had already located 2 rental listings in the area that were within their budget based on what Daniel had told me about the consulting work he'd picked up recently. I said I had asked Thomas to forward those to him. He said, "That wasn't fair." I said a great many things in this life hadn't been fair, and that I had managed anyway, and I believed he could too. He moved out in January. Sandra left a few things in the hall closet that I boxed up and mailed to their new address in Burlington. I did not leave a note in the box, but I wrapped everything carefully and used good tape and made sure nothing would be damaged in transit because that is who I am, and I was not going to become someone else just because things had been hard. I drove back to my house on a Saturday in late January. It had snowed the night before, and the driveway needed clearing, and the kitchen was not as clean as I had left it, and the thermostat had been turned up far higher than I keep it. I dealt with each of these things one at a time. I shoveled the driveway. I cleaned the kitchen. I turned the heat back to where it belongs. Then I put the kettle on, and I stood at the window above the sink, the one Gerald built, and I watched the backyard in the snow. There is something I need to say to you. If you are watching this and you are in a house that you built and a life that you made, and someone is standing at your table telling you what you are going to do with it, you are not obligated to finance someone else's failures at the cost of your own security. Not even if that person is your child. Not even if they look at you across the table with a folder full of highlighted numbers and talk about what is practical and reasonable and sustainable. Love is not a blank check. It is not collateral. It has nothing to do with the equity in your walls. What I did was not revenge. I did not do any of this to punish Daniel. I did it to protect something I had built with my own hands and my husband's hands, and 31 years of mortgage payments and maintenance and memory. I did it because a woman who knows her worth does not negotiate it away at a kitchen table on a Tuesday morning just because someone she loves has decided that her home is a solution to his problem. Gerald used to say that the most important room in any house is the one where the people inside it feel safe. I feel safe now. The window light is the same as it has always been. The maples will go red again in October. The kettle takes exactly 4 minutes. I am home.